The purpose of this presentation is to provide information on 2011 Wisconsin Act 125, which addresses the use of seclusion and physical restraint in public schools, including charter schools. The law went into effect on September 1st, 2012. In this presentation, we will discuss who is covered by the Act's provisions and some important definitions included in the Act. Next, we will discuss the Act's general prohibition of the use of physical restraint and seclusion and the exceptions under which its use is permitted. We will discuss the Act's requirements around notification, reporting, and training. We'll discuss some requirements applicable only to students with disabilities. We will discuss how the Act's provisions harmonize with two existing statutory provisions that apply in schools. Finally, we will provide some additional resources for you to explore as you begin to implement Act 125. The provisions of Act 125 apply to all students, both in special education and regular education. Most of the provisions apply to situations involving both regular education and special education students. There are a few additional provisions concerning individualized education programs of students with disabilities. In this presentation, we will clearly specify which provisions apply only to students with disabilities. The definitions of physical restraint and seclusion included in the Act are the same as those provided by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights for the use in its data collection. This is intended to create consistency, implementation, understanding, and record keeping for schools. These definitions appear on this slide. The Act generally prohibits the use of physical restraint and seclusion in schools. The limited exception is when a student's behavior presents a clear, present, and imminent risk to physical safety of the students or others, and it is the least restrictive intervention feasible. These techniques should be considered crisis interventions. They are not disciplinary measures. In addition, physical restraint may be used only when there are no medical contradictions to its use. Medical conditions may affect how or whether it would even be appropriate to use physical restraint on a student. Medical contradictions may include physical conditions such as brittle bone disease or cerebral palsy. Medical contradictions may also include psychological conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder or reactive attachment disorder. It is important for staff persons who may use physical restraints on a student to be well informed about the student's medical conditions. Remember, physical restraint should be considered a crisis intervention and not a disciplinary measure. It may be used only when least restrictive interventions are not feasible. The degree of force applied and the duration of physical restraint must not exceed what is necessary and reasonable to ensure safety. Once the crisis situation or risk has subsided, physical restraint must be discontinued. The duration of any physical restraint should be short. School staff should think about the duration of physical restraint in terms of minutes. The use of physical restraint poses risk. Therefore, it is important staff is trained and that apply techniques that are safe. The following slide provides information about specific types of maneuvers that are prohibited. There have been several incidences when students have been seriously injured due to inappropriate uses of unsafe restraint maneuvers. Act 125 prohibits several types of maneuvers due to their significant potential harm to a student. Any physical restraint technique used must give adequate attention to protecting the student's head. Techniques must not place pressure or weight on the student's chest, lungs, sternum, diaphragm, back, or abdomen, as pressure on these areas causes chest compressions. Additionally, techniques must not place pressure or weight on the student's neck or throat or any artery or the back of the student's head or neck. Techniques that have the potential to obstruct the student's circulation or breathing must never be used. Chemical restraints, for example using medications to sedate a student, are not appropriate in schools and are prohibited under this Act. Additionally, using objects such as gait belts, rift-in chairs with straps, aprons, or other items to restrain a child to control the child's behavior constitutes mechanical restraints. Use of these objects in this manner is not appropriate or permitted under this Act. Use of equipment to properly align a student's body, assist in maintaining balance, or assist in mobility with appropriate oversight of medical or therapeutic staff is not mechanical restraint. For example, if a student uses a wheelchair with a harness or Riften chair to assist in stabilizing the student, and the use is directed and overseen by appropriate medical or therapeutic staff, it is not considered physical restraint. In addition, the use of bus harness or seatbelts for safety purposes in moving vehicle are not prohibited by this Act. For a student with a disability, the use of such device as bus harness or equipment to provide stabilization must be included in the student's IEP. Physical restraint is restriction that immobilizes or reduces the ability of a student to move freely. Touching a student hand, arm, shoulder, or back to calm, comfort, or redirect the student's attention is not physical restraint. Now let's turn our attention to seclusion. Seclusion is defined as the involuntary confinement of a student apart from other students in a room or area from which the student is physically prevented from leaving. Just as well as physical restraint, seclusion may only be used when a student's behavior presents a clear, present, and imminent risk to physical safety of the student or others and is in the least restrictive intervention feasible. Remember, the prohibitions and conditions around the use of seclusion apply to both regular and special education students. For the use of seclusion to be appropriate, there must be a clear, present, imminent risk to physical safety. It is not appropriate to use seclusion in response to disruptive or non-compliant behavior such as verbal outbursts, shoving paper off desk, interrupting class, fidgeting, etc. It is also important to be aware if a student is afraid of closed spaces or being alone. In such cases, seclusion should not be used. When seclusion is used, school staff must maintain constant supervision of the student. Windows must be large enough to allow the student to be visible in all areas of the room. Devices such as fishbowl mirrors may be used in seclusion rooms to ensure staff maintains supervision. Seclusion should be considered a crisis intervention and not a disciplinary measure. Once the crisis situation or risk has subsided, seclusion must be discontinued. Students in seclusion must have adequate access to the bathroom, drinking water, required medications, and regularly scheduled meals. Staff should think about what adequate access means. If a student's behavior is dangerous, it may not be safe to take the student to the bathroom at that exact moment. However, staff should ensure the student is able to go to the bathroom as soon as safely possible. The duration of any seclusion should be very short. School staff should think about seclusion in terms of minutes. By only using seclusion in crisis situations and for very short periods of time, staff will be able to ensure students have adequate access to the necessities listed on the slide. All rooms in schools must be in compliance with applicable school buildings and fire codes. Nothing in this Act changes any existing building code requirements. Rooms used for seclusion must meet applicable codes. These requirements vary from community to community, so it is important to consult with local building inspectors. Rooms used for seclusion must be free of objects or fixtures that may cause injury to the student. Consider whether such objects as light fixtures within reach of the student, furniture, woodwork, or molding that could be pulled free, active electrical outlets, pipes, glass, or windows that are in the room, and modify the space accordingly. For example, if a room designated to be used for seclusion contains a chalkboard with attached chalk tray, the chalk will have to be removed because the tray's edge could injure a student in the crisis. Under Act 125, no door to a room or area used for seclusion may be capable of being locked. All locks are prohibited, including locks built into doorknobs, padlocks, etc. Some districts have invested in hold-down type locks that require pressure to be applied to a button or switch and release immediately when pressure is removed. These types of locks are not permitted under the Act. All districts must remove locks from doors to rooms or areas designated to be used for seclusion. The term seclusion only applies when a student is confined to an area and is physically prevented from leaving. Seclusion may not be used when a student's behavior presents a clear, present, and imminent risk to the physical safety of the student or others and is the least restrictive intervention feasible. As such, provided the student is not confined to a room or area from which the student is physically prevented from leaving, It is not considered seclusion for a school employee to direct a disrupted student to temporarily separate himself or herself from the activity in the classroom so that the student can regain control. For example, it is not considered seclusion to ask a student causing a disruption to sit in the hallway until he or she is ready to participate in a class appropriately. Similarly, it is not considered seclusion for a school employee to direct a student to temporarily remain in the classroom to complete tasks while other students participate in activities outside of the classroom. For example, it is not considered seclusion to keep a student inside for recess as a behavior disciplinary consequence. Act 125 requires schools to abide by new notification requirements. Anytime seclusion or physical restraint is used, the principal or his or her designee must notify the parent of the incident as soon as possible and no later than one business day after the incident. Business day is defined as Monday through Friday except for federal and state holidays. Schools should be aware a day may be a business day even if the students are not in attendance. For example, a snow day would be considered a business day as well as days during winter and spring breaks that are not state or federal holidays. The principal or designee must also alert the parent to the availability of the required written report for which we will describe shortly. The Act does not specify the form in which the notice will be provided to the parent. Green Bay Area Public Schools has a report for all seclusion and restraint events that we'll review later in a separate presentation. Each time an incident of seclusion or physical restraint occurs, the principal or designee is responsible for preparing a written report. This report must be completed within 2 business days following the incident. The principal or designee must consult with school staff to be present during the incident before completing the report. Again, Green Bay Area Public Schools has a report that we will review during another presentation that includes all information that must be included in the event a seclusion or restraint event has taken place. The written report must be maintained at the school. Additionally, the school must make the report available for the parent's review within 3 business days of the incident. At the time the principal or designee initially notifies the parent of the incident, the parent must be made aware of the availability of the report. Again, in a follow-up presentation to this one, we will review the reporting requirements in Green Bay Area Public School District. The school must maintain all written reports of incidents of seclusion and/or physical restraint by completing them in an annual report to the school board. All data is entered into Infinite Campus by Green Bay Area Public School District, and the central office takes care of the central reporting for all schools in the district. School staff who may use physical restraint must receive appropriate training. At least one staff member in each school where restraint training might be used must be trained. In Green Bay Area Public Schools, staff are trained in nonviolent crisis intervention through CPI. Staff should carefully consider which staff members should receive this training. Administrators, security, safety personnel, regular education staff, student services, and special education staff should be considered. Act 125 includes required topics that must be included in training for staff around the use of physical restraint. The nonviolent crisis intervention training that the district uses in place of this covers the required components of the training. LEA should make every attempt to ensure physical restraint is administered by appropriately trained staff. Districts may wish to consider training several people within each school. While such situations should be avoided, the law recognizes that restraint may be necessary in emergency situations. The unforeseen emergency exception permits staff persons who have not received training to use physical restraints only in emergency situations. The requirements of the Act discussed up to this point apply only to students in both special education and regular education. We will now talk about those specifically for students in special education. When it is reasonably anticipated by the IEP team that the use of seclusion or physical restraint may be necessary, the student's IEP must include a clear statement that the seclusion or physical restraint may be used. The IEP team should discuss the type of physical restraint techniques that might be used and under what circumstances. If seclusion is anticipated, the circumstances around its use should be clearly explained, and parents should have the opportunity to see the room. The words physical restraint and/or seclusion should be included rather than using words such as cool down, timeout, or control hold. Use of precise terminology ensures all members of the IEP team understand the kind of intervention that may be used. The IEP must also include appropriate positive interventions and supports and other strategies to address a student's behavior. The supports and strategies must be based on the results of a functional behavior assessment. For more information on SBAs, see the Department of Public Instruction's website along with your Associate Director of Special Education for your building. Data on the use of seclusion and/or physical restraint should always be reviewed for an individual child to determine if an IEP team meeting is necessary to review the effectiveness of the positive behavioral supports associated with the FBA. Sometimes the need for seclusion or restraint has not been anticipated. If seclusion or physical restraint is used on a student with a disability for the first time and its use is not addressed within the student's IEP, the IEP team must meet as soon as possible. During this meeting, the IEP team must also review the IEP to ensure it contains appropriate positive interventions. Section 118.164 allows a teacher to remove a student from class to send the student to the school principal and his or her designee if a student violates the code of classroom conduct, exhibits dangerous, unruly, or disruptive behavior. Act 125 does not affect the ability of the principal or his or her designee to place a student in an alternative education program, another class, or appropriate place in the school, another instruction setting, and return. If any of the situations described above, the use of physical restraint or seclusion may be appropriate. If and only if a student's behavior presents a clear, present, or imminent risk of physical safety to the pupil or others. Section 118.31 of the Wisconsin statute prohibits the use of corporal punishment in schools. Corporal punishment includes, but is not limited to, paddling, stapling, slapping, or prolonged maintenance of physical painful positions when used as a means of discipline. What can we do now? Review IEPs for compliance in the Act, train staff on how to document, review seclusion rooms to ensure that they comply with the law, create and review incident report forms after a seclusion or restraint event takes place, talk to parents of students who have gone through a seclusion or restraint event, and continue to implement directives. Again, there will be a follow-up presentation to this which will review where the seclusion and restraint forms are for Green Bay Area Public School District and how we fulfill those and where we send them.